One of my earliest influences back when I was learning how to paint and understanding color, shape design, lighting, all that stuff. Craig Mullins, of course. Goodbrush.com. You can get a quick tour. This is one of my favorite pieces of his works. I came across one recently that I remembered that had such a big influence on the way I paint faces. Let me find it. Aha. And this one, of course. There is so much happening here that you can learn from. Man, that's awesome. And of course he has so much work in the way he simplifies color, value, light, lost edges, blah, blah, blah. Definitely still one of my favorite artists. Let's take a closer look at this and do a quick analysis. And then based on the analysis, I'll try to do a painting from reference with the stuff I'm talking about here as a sort of preview for my boot camp course that I'm recording for digital painting heads and portraits. Okay, so yeah, first things first, values are great, you know. And let's take a look at the values. Even in black and white, it reads really well. That's how you know everything is in accordance. I actually remember back in the day, I found the reference picture that I used for this, but unfortunately that username Pandora Stock no longer is on DeviantArt. It was a stock account. Anyway, I'm just gonna real quick circle the areas where there's actual detail, because oftentimes we look at a painting or image and zoomed out, it looks like it's pretty rendered, right? But there's actually only a couple areas that have actual detail. So we have here, here, and I'm gonna do that lightly there because it's detailed but not super rendered, obviously. Detail there, here, some information there, here, and then there. And then like some textured stuff here. But I'm not gonna circle that because, well, maybe a little bit. And some there. But we could also just group these areas like that. And then you realize like everything else, there isn't too much information. You have some indicative stuff over here being framed really well by the edges, but also lost edges. So let's take a look at the edges now. Sharp edge, and we'll use a different color for lost edge. Lost edge, sharper edge, but not quite sharp. And then sharp, sharp. And over here, definitely lost edge on the silhouette. It gets sharp again right there, lost again, and sharp again. Right, and so I would recommend doing this kind of analysis when you're wondering how paintings are working. Look for lost edges, look at where all the details actually are in terms of how the artist is choosing to show those details. And you'll notice, I just noticed this, I didn't even realize it until now, this cluster of detail aligns with the lack of a sharp edge here and here. Interesting. It's almost like he's taking turns. You know, this area, sharp edges on the outside. This area, no sharp edges, but a lot of detail in the middle. And the sharp edges again, not too much information in the middle. Ah, genius. Okay, aside from that, if I was to use a texture brush in a painting, where would I actually use it? Now, I did already kind of circle where details are in terms of refinement, but what about just straight up texture? So there's texture up here, probably just a loose scribble to indicate information and noise. And texture there for sure, a little bit of texture there. You know, roughness around the edges over here, some texture there, a little bit there, and just a little bit here and there. Notice it's not absolutely everywhere, right? It's like creating noise and information, and everything else either has a cluster of detail or area of rest where it's a nice breathing room in order to have like enough breathing room for these details to stand out against, because you don't want your details to be over here, then suddenly right next to it a bunch of like texture brushes and high density detail information. Like you know that just kind of starts to compete with the information here. So yeah, I mean, it still looks good. It's not too bad if you want to take that more rendered look, but in terms of just indicating the look of the illusion of form, light, color, information, you can distill it down to these things and make choices, creative choices of simplifying things in order to just highlight the necessary details. Because I remember when I did see that reference photo, all this hair was like pretty well rendered in. Not rendered, obviously, it was a photo. And it was a lot of information, but I guess he said, or he was thinking, since there's a lot of detail here, might as well not put detail there and make it just rough so that it doesn't compete with the details of the face. Anyway, so those are some notes. That's how I look at paintings and analyze them. Since I don't have the actual reference, just found something somewhat similar in terms of the angle. The lighting's definitely different, but we can find a way to distill that information. What I'm actually going to do is crop it, and we want to simplify all the information here. What I'm going to do is straight up just circle the details that I want as focal points. Obviously the eyes, maybe one stronger than the other, kind of like what we just saw in that the example painting. Detail here, probably detail on this side of the mouth, but have a fall off of detail towards the end over there. Probably some detail there. We'll leave all this pretty empty. Not too much texture, not too much roughness, because we want to frame all this information as a focal point. And then I love that information. Let's get that magenta color back. I love the detail here, so I want to bring that in. All this is going to be rough and loose. Some detail there, detail here, so on and so forth. Definitely going to make this pretty clear to see. Not too tightly rendered, but it's pretty important to show that sternocleidomastoid for this kind of pose where the head is turning to the left. Well, our left, her right. That shadow is pretty important. I'll make sure to clarify that. What about edges? So let's keep these edges pretty soft. It's something I literally just learned from analyzing his painting. Keep anything within here in terms of silhouette, the edges being soft. And then up here, I'll keep some soft edges next to the detail stuff so that the edge doesn't compete with the detail over here. Soft edge. And then up there, we'll make this a sharp edge. Sharp here, but a nice fall off there. So I've actually never planned out a painting like this where it's like, okay, let me figure it out beforehand. And God, this is all on one layer. All right, let's go back in time. Well, close enough. I'll try to remember what it is that I did there. I'm just gonna do a quick sketch of the face. I should just drag in Pure Ref, but I'm too lazy to do that right now. I'm gonna zoom out. First line I'm gonna put that sternocleidomastoid. Just for some reason, that's a nice anchor point for the rest of the piece to kind of just build off of. And then there's an obvious triangle there, so I'm just gonna lay that right in. Another triangle. There's another triangle here. And it sort of makes a bow tie. So like I love looking for these kinds of shapes. Triangle there, triangle here. That tells us like where the face is going to sit. If you start looking for shapes like that, everything else just becomes so much easier. And I'm going to be pretty loose with the rest of it because I'm not trying to be too accurate. I just want to get the impression in a sort of impressionist fashion of the image. All right, classic painterly technique. What I'm going to do is just lay in some orange. Well, not really orange. And with actual paint, you'd be using burnt sienna, or sometimes raw sienna. Some people like to mix in a bit of burnt umber in there, make it a little bit darker. But basically just a nice little warm underpainting of values. Because now when I grab that background color, it's like maybe like a teal, and it has a really nice contrast against that orange. So we're just going to treat it like an oil painting. I'm going to move this over to the top left so there's more tension between this edge and the top of the canvas, just to kind of show more importance about the top left of the piece, rather than kind of having it centered, which is fine, it works, but this feels a little bit interesting because you're creating a nice tension point there. We don't want it to touch the top. That'd be an awkward tangent. We want to do something like this. Lay that in pretty loosely. Notice it's darker up here in the top right. Gonna do a quick fade from the top right towards the bottom left of just a slightly darker version. I'm gonna lay in sort of a yellowish, almost silvery looking gray / white, just as a base. Be very loose with it. Okay, gonna make a new layer and put some of that warm color there. All right, so the first areas I circled were the eyes, nose, and mouth. So I'm gonna take a look at how he's handling it here. Looks like there's a kind of 50% gray, and he builds up the value from there and probably etches in some dark values on top of that. So let's go ahead and do something like that. And if you want to figure out where those values are for these highlights, you could manipulate the image. So let's go ahead and duplicate it by hitting Control J. Let's bring that high contrast together like this. And then you could even look at it in black and white. Yeah, maybe not. Either way works. But yeah, you can kind of just look at the shape that it's making. You know, you have a sort of V shape like that, little island there, highlight there, triangle, 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 triangle with a hotspot. Goes up there on the cheekbone, shape there, triangle, little triangle. And really doesn't really happen elsewhere on the face at least, except obviously the eyes, and we'll get to that. And when I turn that layer off, it's not as obvious where those highlights are, but the more you practice, the more you can kind of tell that they're there. Let's actually just use the new version as a reference, but I'm going to lower the opacity so it mixes between the two. Cool. Just going to lay in those highlights real quick, and I'm just going to be pulling values up and out. All right, well, I think that's decent enough as a study. We copy the information over in terms of highlights and values. Snuck in some skin tones of reds, a little bit of blues and stuff here and there that I stole from the background over here. But overall, the information reads pretty well. I don't know if I'm using everything I learned from this quick study from Craig Mullins in terms of the analysis, but yeah, it looks like I'm missing like big chunks of texture, like that hair area, but that's fine, whatever. I hope that was helpful, and have a good one. Bye.